The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, on this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, journalist and author Brandi Morin is here with her deeply moving memoir of a warrior rising. Then, with the poll results on which is the greatest Great Lake of all, we'll speak to the winner about why they thought the result was obvious from the outset. And the Agenda's Weekend Review goes deep on the entire Great Lakes region, from Indigenous ways of knowing to whether it will become a climate haven. It's Friday, September 30th, and that's coming up on the agenda. The reporter isn't supposed to be part of the story. But for journalist Brandi Morin, there came a time when it was painfully clear that the story she was reporting on could just as easily have been about her. Devastating loss, abuse, oppression. But as her new memoir also reveals, strength, clarity, and the bravery to seek justice. It's called Our Voice of Fire, a memoir of a warrior rising. Brandi Morin is an internationally recognized French Cree Iroquois journalist, and she joins us now in our studio. It's so nice to meet you in person. This book, you know, before we came on camera, I said that there's a lot of things that you wrote about in here that are painful to talk about. So I just want you to know you don't have to go there if you don't want to. But you've worked for media outlets like APTN, the New York Times, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, National Geographic. You've shed light on so many people's stories through your reporting. So why did you decide to tell your own story in a memoir?
Yeah, so I've been telling these stories, like you said, for many years, and yes, this is an intimate story, and it's a devastating story. But when I'm out there, telling these stories, people are sharing those intimate details with me, and they're sharing these truths with the world. And I thought, with the platform that I have as a journalist, I can also share those truths and to give back, to provide insight, because I think that a lot of times our people aren't humanitized in the media. And, I wanted to give, a look into the life of a survivor such as myself, because, I've been very moved and impacted by this genocide of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and visiting the home where Tina Fontaine was raised. For those that are unfamiliar with Tina Fontaine, she was 15 years old, and her body was found dumped in the Winnipeg Red River. And I could have been her, and she could have been me. She could have been, a journalist for justice doing these big things. And so I thought, I wanted to bring attention, with these platforms that I had.
Well, you brought up Tina, and in the book you write about that meeting and how difficult it was for you to hold your emotions back. And I just want to read what you wrote in the book since you brought it up. You write, "Tina died, I survived. Tina died, I survived. I am her, she is me." I think it's safe to say that most of us would probably crawl into a fetal position, but you chose to use what happened to you as fuel. How were you able to do that?
Wow. I just, had this sense of fighting inside of me, like fighting to get out of that darkness that I was raised in and around. And I had this warrior spirit. There was just always this spark that there was something better. And so I found that through becoming a journalist, through a love of writing, through a love of people, and through doing what I do, it coincided with my own healing from the different traumas that I experienced, right? So it was just, it was a a blessing in many ways.
Many parts of the book were hard to read, and I'm sure they were very difficult for you to write. What was it like to revisit some of the most traumatic experiences and painful memories that you went through?
So, believe it or not, revisiting and writing about my rape and escaping with my life wasn't the hardest part. Because,
What was the hardest part?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in a healing journey for many years and going through therapy and different things. The hardest part for me was going back to when I was completely broken and unable to take care of my children and neglecting my children and having my children taken from me. Revisiting when my daughter Faith, my firstborn, was 4 months old and neglecting her, and the pain of revisiting how could I have done that. And I cried for days, remembering and going through those parts, and called my daughter Faith and, apologized and had this kind of beautiful full circle conversation with her, even though she doesn't remember anything, right? But that was the hardest for me. But I was also so grateful because I was able to get my kids back. There's so many, of our children that are in the foster care system across this country, and the families aren't supported to get their children back, And so I also felt, very, very grateful.
I want to talk about the foster system in the country in a little bit, but I wanted to just have a follow-up on something that you just said, because in the book, you were very honest in the ways that you neglected your children. I think for a lot of us, we see ourselves we try to see ourselves in a positive light, but you were very honest about some of the things that you did. Did you worry about being judged or being misunderstood?
I did, for a little bit. I have worked very hard to be doing what I'm doing, and I did, wonder, would people be judging me or, questioning, my capability but it was so important to me to be authentic, to share these truths, because these truths are often just hidden away. They're brushed under the rug. We don't talk about them. And if they can't come to the surface, I don't really think that the healing or the understanding can come about for so many people. And even, when we talk about the intergenerational trauma or the impacts of things such as residential schools, our people didn't talk about them for years because it was too traumatic, or, there was violence, that came about, such as, racism and discrimination. I feel it's so important to speak truthfully and honestly. And I know that, it's helped other people. And when I have spoken, I have learned about others who have gone through things. Those have very much helped me, because then I think, man, if they could get through that, there's hope for me too.
And because some of your children are older, and I'm guessing they're able to, I don't know if they've read the book, but is this maybe a way for you to have that conversation, those painful conversations?
Absolutely. They have read the book. My son read it in a day, which was pretty amazing. And they've seen and experienced us going through some rough times growing up, but they also seen their mother who never gave up, their mother who kept striving, who kept fighting, and that is breaking the cycle. That is empowering for them, and they're really proud of me for that. So,
in the book, you talk about how stubborn you are and how you have this fire, and you are indeed a fighter and a warrior. But as you wrote in the book, you continue to battle the challenges rooted in cycles of addiction, abuse, and violence. Even when you became an accomplished reporter, you write in the book, I'm talking world changer, history maker, badass, mother warrior stuff. But the question that plagued me was, how could I be doing so well in my professional life, but epically failing in my personal life? Do you have an answer to that question?
Like I said, this journey of being successful as a journalist and, earning these accolades and such like that. At the same time, I was on a hardcore inner journey of healing. And as my career was moving up and up, my healing necessarily wasn't happening at the same rate. And it was frustrating for me because I thought, oh, it's all going to be good once I get here and once this happens. But for me, I really believe that healing is a lifelong journey. And I'm still, going through that process. I'm still in counseling. I still need to do things. And even doing the work that I do, it's heavy. It's traumatic, going into a lot of these situations, dealing with, telling the stories of residential school survivors or meeting with families whose, daughters and sisters have been murdered or missing or, this is really hardcore stuff, right? And so it's a continual push to work through.
You mentioned the amount of work that you do, but also the impacts on it of, physically and emotionally it impacts you. How do you find a way to process those things? Because your life has been threatened. And to move forward and tell these stories.
I just, I think a lot of it is prayer. I get through a lot of it, by prayer and just, this belief in what I'm doing, that it's right and that it's essential. Like, I believe that the work that I do is human rights work and that there are literally lives on the line. When I'm dealing with this stuff, there's been times when I'm on the road and I'm so impacted that I'll have to take sleeping pills because I'm experiencing nightmares and, different things. But I get a release somewhat when the stories are out there, when the stories are published or when they're broadcast. And when they're, given to the world. So, I just deal with it with prayer, with, talking to elders that I know, and just working through it as I go.
You write about intergenerational trauma that you experienced, yet you express so much love and empathy towards your mother and your family. How does your childhood and home life affect your approach to parenting your own children?
Oh, wow. Well, it's been hard. It's been a lot of, undoing. And that's a really tough question. It's different now. I have a 4-year-old now. And there's a large gap between her and my older kids. And back then, when I was raising my older kids, I was really in survival mode a lot. And they experienced a lot of, like me, having bouts of depression or, I would, yell and things like that. And now that I have a 4-year-old, it's so much different. I'm not in survival mode. And I am more healed and I'm able to give to her that love and what she needs. It's not to say that I didn't give that to my other children. It was a different experience. But it was, I really didn't have a lot to pull from. And again, it was a creating and learning as I went.
One of my favorite chapters of the book is when you write about your cocoon, and you write about the struggles she went through, and you also write about the struggles that your parents went through. And even though you had a lot of challenges with your parents, you have that empathy, you have that love and that protection. Where do you find the peace to forgive in the ways that they didn't show up for you as parents?
Oh, wow. There was a lot of chaos, growing up. But there was a lot of love. We were rooted in that love. I may have felt lost. There may have, been times where I felt afraid or I wasn't at home and I was going, back and forth with the foster care system. But we had those deep bonds of love. And I can't hold on to any of that poison of animosity or unforgiveness. I did go through that, through processing the anger, not really knowing, what it was. It was just reacting to those environments. But it's because I understand, and I give, grace for that. They didn't have the tools. They were working with what they had, to do the best that they could do. Their intention wasn't to hate or to harm. They worked with what they had. And so I think that's where, I draw from to forgive and to love.
And you also demonstrate that in your storytelling. Your mission has been to amplify the voices of Indigenous peoples, especially survivors of gender-based violence. How do you reconcile the ideas of activism and journalistic objectivity in that space?
Yeah, so, I didn't go to journalism school. I had a passion for it and learned on the ground and kind of did this grassroots. I didn't know that, journalists aren't supposed to, connect with the people necessarily that they're telling these stories. It was always about building relationships for me and, getting wholly involved with these people in order to draw these stories out. I think that the way that many storytellers go about, this job has to change, especially in marginalized or Indigenous communities. There's so much harm that's been done there, and we have to start from the ground up. We have to start with, breaking down these barriers and become authentic. Like, you can have objectivity, but these are human beings that we're dealing with. I take these stories extremely seriously, and I am invested in them. And I'm invested and care about these people and these places. It doesn't mean that I don't include the facts and do well, in what I do.
Your own journey of reconnection to your Indigenous bloodlines and culture evolved over time. I mean, the first few pages of the book, just the way you wrote it, just makes you just stop. You feel the tears coming down your face because you didn't even know where you came from. Why is there a lack of awareness among some children and grandchildren of residential school survivors of who they are and where they come from?
I mean, that is a part of that disconnect, right? And it was the goal of assimilation to, change our identities and to, snuff all of that out. And so you have these gaps in the generations. And, I knew what it was to be Indigenous, but I only knew it at a certain level. I didn't know it. I didn't know that our family came from a place and had been displaced, not far from where I grew up. I didn't know the deep roots and the beauty and the richness of who we are. And again, just like people didn't talk about residential schools, it was forgotten. People didn't talk. The people were punished.
And when you say punished, I just want to interject because you found the writings of your kukum, and she was talking about this the stress that she had after she passed on. She was going to hell because of who she was. So this stuff is really deeply ingrained.
Oh, absolutely. That's what they did. The churches in these schools, they drilled into the children that they were savages, and that if they didn't renounce their Indian heritage, that they would be damned to hell. And so this was a very real thing. Like, even my own kukum, she was a devout Catholic till she died. And it was ingrained into her. Even though she was proud Native woman, it was this deeply ingrained into her till the end.
She had this worry. You lived in and out of foster homes from the age of 6 until you were 18 years old. According to Statistics Canada, more than half of the children in Canadian foster homes are Indigenous, despite them making up less than 8% of the country's child population. What does that say about where Canada is when we do talk about reconciliation?
It says that we're in a mess. It's plain and simple. We're in a mess, and this is the fallout. This is the fallout of all of that violence from the colonial agenda, to the residential school, to the 60s scoop, to where we are now.
Does it break your heart? Because you were in those spaces and some of the things that you experienced at such a young age, 13, locked away for 6 months, the things that you experienced through there, and people don't know about that.
I mean, of course it does, and there's kids that are dying even in these systems now, in the foster care system, because we're so overrepresented, and our many of our people are lost, but things are changing. I do see hope. We are in a mess, but that trajectory is starting to change course finally.
Well, what role do you think journalism and storytelling play in truth and reconciliation?
Really huge, because the media has a major influence over societal perceptions, and can help place pressure onto the different authorities and systems to help make change, or just bring general awareness to help get rid of racism and discrimination and hate. And so when our people aren't represented accurately or at all, then that is going to perpetuate a lot of this violence against our people, a lot of the racism and the stereotyping and this and that. So it plays a huge role to get it right.
And when we talk about, I just want to go back to that question about objectivity and activism. When we talk about separating your lived experience from these kind of stories, it's impossible. Do you think that that's a kind of a way to shut out certain people from covering certain stories?
I don't know, because something that's really interesting, sometimes people would say to me, well, you can't cover these stories because you're Indigenous. And I would say, well, why are you covering these mainstream stories? You're white. It's the same thing. They have that lived experience in their own communities, right? So for me, I don't see it that way.
And when the Pope came to visit Canada and give their apology to residential school survivors, to several major media outlets, you covered it.
Yeah.
Do you see that? How important was for you and the communities that you're representing for you to be able to do that in that moment?
It was important. That was a difficult assignment. Just a lot of very mixed feelings about that whole experience. But I was thankful.
What?
Well, I mean, it's really hard to take it seriously. It's hard to take it in. I mean, it's heavy as it is, following one of the most powerful men in the world, around the country. I had gone to Rome as well. And, wondering if this is authentic and what will happen out of it, and just dealing with the heaviness of the survivors and everything. But I knew that it was historic. And I was thankful for that. I was thankful to be able to document and witness and experience these survivors, that some of them had prayed for this to happen, for years and years. So, in that sense, yes.
Well, you've been reporting on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls for many years now. Have you seen changes and progress being made?
No, not in this genocide that we're in, no. No, not at all. We have the national inquiry that happened and their report that came out in 2019. Our women are still being murdered and going missing at alarming rates. In Vancouver lately, there's been multiple Indigenous women, even over the past year, that have been murdered. One as young, I think, was 13 years old. It's not slowing down. And I don't believe that enough's being done about it.
You were one In the book, you say how you could have been one of those women and girls. When you cover these stories and you see the lack of movement on the issue, you think what?
I just keep pushing. I just keep doing what I do to get these stories out there.
It makes you more determined?
It makes me more determined, absolutely. I don't want to stop. And, I just want to bring these faces to the forefront, that maybe these stories and these people would reverberate in the hearts of other people, that they would be moved to do something. Because, I always say, people say that, oh, if they knew what was going on in the residential school system at the time when these children were being stolen from their families, when they were being experimented on and abused and even dying, that they would have done something. But I question that, because there's so many things that are happening right now, such as this genocide and other atrocities right now. And what are they doing?
In the book, you write that you're tired of being the hunted, that you are going to become the hunter. And in the book, you also write about all these people that you take care of. How do you take care of yourself?
Oh, wow. That's something that I'm learning every, as I go as well. Again, this work really drives me in everything that I do. I consider it a purpose. Again, I have a lot of prayer. I have people, supports that I get through, and just take it step by step.
And you're up for a huge award. You're receiving a huge award. Can you tell us that in our final moments?
Absolutely. So I learned recently that I won one of the most prestigious awards in the world for journalism, an Edward R. Murrow Award, and it was actually for my series with Al Jazeera English on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, the Highway of Tears, and the correlations between the violence that industry brings in. And I'm going in a week to go to New York City to accept that award. And the reason why this is massive is because we've been fighting for these stories to get to the mainstream for so many years. And to get this top award is huge. That is our voices coming to the forefront. So I'm gonna walk that red carpet.
You're going to shine on the red carpet.
Yes.
Congratulations. Everything that you've experienced in this book, so many people can get from. You almost gave up so many times, but you refused. You just kept moving forward. Congratulations on everything. And thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Hi. Thank you.
You chose the GLOAT, Ontario. That is, in the Great Lakes face-off that polled which was the greatest of the greats, the winner was the bold and somewhat braggadocious lake that always expected to get the win, Lake Superior. And so joining us now from somewhere in Michigan, the anonymous creator behind the Twitter parody account at Lake Superior joins us once again to celebrate their victory. Hello.
Hello, it is great to see you today from the beautiful shores of Lake Superior.
I'm not sure if I should curtsy or say Sir Lake Superior, because now you've been named as the greatest lake of all time. Should I do that?
I respect that you acknowledge my greatness, but I'm not one for formalities. So long as you respect the name.
I respect the name. Put some respect on that name. All right, let's pull up the results. Lake Superior landed a massive win with 38% of the vote. Lake Huron and Lake Erie approached the finish line neck and neck, but ultimately Lake Erie came out on top with 25.09% and Huron at 24.96%. 8% of voters chose Lake Ontario as the greatest Great Lake, leaving just 4% of the vote to Lake Michigan. Lake Superior, how do you feel about your win?
That's a nice win. I feel good, but I won't lie. It's been higher than next year I'm shooting for 50% at a minimum.
Well, I'm trying to be very professional, and I'm putting myself back into my sports days when my team lost, because I was really rooting for Lake Ontario. So Lake Superior, why do you think Ontarians feel so strongly about Lake Superior?
Well, I'll try to set my ego aside, but Lake Superior is a special place. It is a massive lake and has the title for a reason. The sheer volume of water, the depth of 1,300 feet, the breadth of it, 270 miles across, it is amazing. And I think that is all multiplied by my very moody ways, from calm days in the summer to massive waves and the biggest waves ever recorded on the Great Lakes. I'm one of a kind.
So Lake Superior has a mood for every season, but we actually had a debate here on the show on September 21st, where each panelist made the case for why the lake they were representing should earn the title of the greatest lake of all time. Well, you faced some criticism during that debate. Let's take a look at one attack leveled by you by Mayor Walter Sendzik, who was representing Lake Michigan.
People shouldn't be voting for Lake Superior, because if you listen to Lake Superior talk, it's all about me, and being the best. And he actually refers to himself as the gloat.
As the kids would say, no lies were spoken. Does Lake Superior have a superiority complex?
Yes, but I would like to quote one of my idols, Muhammad Ali, who I believe said, "I'm the greatest, I'm the double greatest. I knew that even before I was."
Well, Lake Superior, I don't know if this is an unfair advantage because you're the only lake with a Twitter account.
Yes, I had the Lake Superior Twitter handle for over a decade, which has been a fun exercise, creative exercise in writing and expressing this view of superiority and greatness. So there's a lot of sass. There's a lot of puns related to water and waves and buoys. But the serious side of the account likes to relay the messages of Great Lakes scientists. Not just Lake Superior, but I love reading all the reports and research from Great Lakes scientists from Lake Superior through all of my siblings.
Well, let's wrap this competition with some calls to action. What are some steps each of us can take to better protect the Great Lake Superior from pollution?
Well, one of the first things I'll say, I'll reiterate from my panel, and one of the reasons I like the tagline, Vote the Gloat, is that we do have lots of environmental issues across the Great Lakes. And those aren't caused by bears. Those aren't caused by the eagles. They can't be fixed by the trout or the moose. It is entirely up to humans to address these issues. And one of the best ways to do that is to do it with your vote.
Well, Lake Superior, congratulations. The greatest of all time. Thanks for being with us.
I will be here for centuries to come.
Thanks so much. The agenda this week took to the water. As part of our partnership with the Council of the Great Lakes region, during the Great Lakes Public Forum in Niagara Falls, we explored Indigenous knowledge of the watershed, considered whether the region might become a climate refuge, and asked if Canada was dropping the ball on protecting the lakes. Have a look.
Are the U.S. and Canada making similar levels of investment in the lakes?
No, I think Canada is unfortunately being eclipsed. It's being outpaced by our American partners, and that has been happening more and more over the last decade. You know, right now, Canada more or less spends roughly $9 million a year in terms of its Great Lakes protection funding, community grants to support different projects. You know, they're making some important investments in restoring areas of concern that are on the Canadian side of the border. But the funding has just been a real disappointment, I think, to me and a lot of Canadians. We're falling behind on science. We're falling behind on restoration. I think we're just falling behind in just really trying to understand and care for this globally significant ecosystem. And I know that Cam can speak about the experience on the U.S. side much more than I can and why it's been so successful.
Well, that's who I'm going to next. Cam, I don't want to single you out, but I'm going to single you out. Are your neighbors to the north dropping the ball on this?
Yeah. Yes, they are. Canada, the Canadian federal government is dropping the ball, and they're dropping it they're fumbling the ball even. And I don't say that to not acknowledge all of the ways in which the Canadian federal government has played a leadership role in many instances, going way beyond what we in the U.S. have ever done. But in this instance, one way that we can restore and protect the Great Lakes, we have to, is by making a financial commitment to that. Without the investment, without the money, all of the other things are just kind of words. And here in the U.S., we're up now past $500 million US. And what you just heard from Mark Fisher is that Canada is at about 9 million Canadian. That is a world of difference, and it means a lot. It makes a big difference when investments are so lopsided. So we need Canada to catch up, and to catch up fast.
All right. Mark Matson, I want to get your take on that as well in terms of where Canada stands with the level of investments. Are we dropping the ball on this?
Well, I agree with Mark and Cam on that. I mean, Canada hasn't been stepping up and really living up to its reputation as the greatest defender of the Great Lakes. No other country can really claim that. I mean, the United States, with the 8 states involved, there's a lot of different political jurisdictions. But in Canada, our federal government and fresh water, we have such a global reservoir of fresh water, and the Great Lakes, 20% of the world's surface fresh water. Canada needs to step up, and money's a big part of that. We have all kinds of projects, restoration projects that haven't been finished, and new projects, community initiatives that need to be led in order to collect the data to do the work to protect it going forward. So I think Canada's getting the sense now that they need to address the Great Lakes issues more than they ever have in the past, and I think they're looking. And I really think we're going to see some changes in the future. But right now, I don't know if it's been the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, but it certainly seems like Canada has not stepped up to the plate for the Great Lakes financing and investments.
Kelsey, I see you nodding. I want to get you to weigh in on that as well.
Yes, I agree with everything that my panelists have shared so far. We really do need more investment from the Canadian government, particularly for First Nations as well. We see that, of those dollars, the community grants that were mentioned earlier, they often significantly go towards non-Indigenous governments, so to municipalities, to provinces, but we're not really seeing there be an equal distribution or a comparable distribution to First Nation governments in the same way that we see access to those similar types of financial resources on the U.S. side through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So there is a substantial amount more resources available for tribal nations than there are for First Nations in working to protect the lakes, of which they are usually those on the front lines facing the direct impact when the lakes are degraded or polluted. So really just wanting to see more investment overall from Canada to make up for that.
Kelsey, I want to stick with you here. How can we say that Canada is concerned about the lakes with the level of financial commitment, which we seem to unanimously say is not enough, than we're seeing? How can we say that we are so concerned when the dollars don't match up?
I don't know that we can. That's probably a very easy answer. I don't know that we can say that Canada is concerned. I think that it is now, hopefully, through these conversations, will become more apparent to both the federal and provincial governments that they need to put more resources towards science, towards restoration, towards conservation efforts for the lakes, and in particular that there need to be opportunities for collaboration, partnership, and often in some instances, maybe more so than not, direct-led Indigenous conservation efforts for the lakes. We have, millennia of knowledge and applied science in these spaces and territories, and so why not get a higher return on your investment by putting those dollars with people who know what to do with them?
Mark Fisher, same question to you in terms of, it must be frustrating in terms of the amount of advocating, the amount of pressure that you guys are putting on political government to get stuff done, but the dollars aren't saying much. And I am curious in terms of how this money is being spent. Where exactly are we seeing it go?
Well, it is disappointing. I think in terms of my advocacy, I often remind both the federal government and the Ontario government that 1 in 3 Canadians live in the Great Lakes Basin. 40% of Canada's economic activity is based here. They call the Great Lakes region home. And so, focusing on the Great Lakes, focusing on this region is, makes good ecological sense. It's also good economic sense. And for the life of me, I don't understand why we don't have a more robust strategy, robust approach when we think about how do we improve this region's long-term economic success and sustainability. When it comes to the funding right now, some of it is going to science, which we need to be doing a heck of a lot more of to understand those emerging challenges I talked about earlier, including a rapidly changing climate. And it's going to these community grants and these community projects that are doing important restoration work and projects around the Great Lakes coastline, but we're just not doing enough in terms of the sheer scope and scale that it needs to be done on to truly protect the Great Lakes region.
The creator, in order to give humans drinking water, because there was ocean water here, according to our creation story, he dragged his fingers along the Great Lakes so that the water would be there, as well as put water underneath, which is really medicine. So our aquifers are precious and sacred to us. And in fact, the words in Mohawk for things like rain or water, it's about being precious. It's things that, like Indigenous, our research project, it's cherished. These are things you hold as the sustenance of life, and to take care of it with great care. So I think Six Nations has been really battling Nestle and now Blue Triton from draining our aquifer, while many of us go without access to clean drinking water because we don't get the funding that the federal government gave other communities to get access to clean water. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have waste treatment plants. We don't have operating money. So our people pay for water to be trucked in. They pay for the septic to be removed. And you can be upwards of $400 a month just to have access to things Canadians enjoy. So I think Six Nations is doing all that it can to try to provide services, but our source water, the Grand River, is contaminated. We have 25 different waste treatment plants upstream from us. We have Uniroyal, who was dumping, PCBs and carcinogens. So there's a lot to clean up in that water, but we're in the same situation that many Canadians are going to find themselves in if they don't make different policies and water laws, which I hope Canada does, because their water laws are over almost 60 years old and don't even include Indigenous people. So I'm glad that they're recognizing treaties, because if we get our treaties recognized, we will start improving our ecosystems. That's a proven fact.
Well, that is certainly why we've invited the three of you to come on our airwaves tonight and share your wisdom on these issues. And Tasha, maybe you could help us with this. I introduced you at the beginning of our conversation as a water walker, and I'm not sure everybody knows what that means. So why don't you tell us what that means to be a water walker?
All right. Well, the Water Walk movement is actually, it began in 2003 with an Anishinaabe grandmother, a late Anishinaabe grandmother. She's since passed away, by the name of Josephine Bauman Dahlman. And we put the BA at the end of her name to recognize her as having passed on. But in 2003, she and a number of other grandmothers were following a call out by the Three Fires Midewin chief, Eddie Benton Benai, as well. He's passed on. And at that time, the elders were talking about a prophecy wherein water would eventually be worth more than her weight in gold. And at that time, they asked, what are you going to do about it? So Josephine Ba and a number of other grandmothers decided to take one of the Midewin water ceremonies out into the public eye, and they wanted to activate and move for the Great Lakes. And so she began walking. So essentially, the water walk is a ceremony where we take some of the source or the headwater in a copper vessel. You can see one behind me there. And we carry that, we kind of orphan the water from its original source. And then we walk along as close to the water's edge as possible. And so the water walk movement is about, first and foremost, it's a ceremony. It's to recognize that water is life. And while we're walking, we're praying and we're singing and we're speaking in the language, acknowledging the life that the water carries for us, but also looking ahead 7 generations. And while it's also more than a ceremony, because people, the way I conceptualize it, we become visual walking prayers. And so we're a physical representation of our inherent right to access to that water, and in our inherent right to have ceremony for that water. And so Josephine Ba, by the end of her, she walked for almost 20 years, and she accumulated almost 30,000 kilometers. I myself have walked for the water for 11 years. So I walked in 2015. We went from Matane, Quebec to Duluth. In 2017, we went back, and it's a very different, you see the world differently when you're walking alongside the water or on the earth herself versus, speeding in a train or a vehicle. And so you get to bear witness. And unfortunately, I've walked for, like I said, 11 years, almost 8,000 kilometers, a small amount compared to Josephine Ba. But in those 11 years, one of the most striking elements that I think we as water walkers have borne witness to is the amount of garbage, the amount of waste. I think of Junction Creek. I did a water walk for Junction Creek in 2021, and Junction Creek actually empties into Lake Huron. And so the amount of garbage, at one point I was at the shoreline in tears, because I don't think people realize that all of that garbage eventually finds its way into the Great Lakes. And as we've established, they're all connected. As of today, 22 million pounds of plastic enter the Great Lakes. And I mean, it sounds tremendous, but it's actually very frightening, because that plastic breaks down into something called microplastics. And microplastics are these teeny tiny minuscule amounts and they don't disappear. And so as a result, they enter into that life cycle. And in fact, one of the things that scientists have discovered is that as humans, we are now seeing children born with these microplastics in their bloodstream, and we as adults have them as well. So the water walk, as we move, we are gathering knowledge. We are gathering knowledge from those who live alongside the shore. We're gathering knowledge from the water herself, and we interact. Many non-Indigenous people, we carry a eagle water staff and this copper pail. And so when you're walking, people come up and, what are you doing? And so it becomes a method of education.
We're looking at the southeast United States, looking at Florida, our coastal area, the Gulf Coast. These are places that are well aware of their climate risk. Whether or not politically they've been able to address it is another question. We're obviously seeing, well, right in this moment, we're seeing a hurricane bearing down on Florida, and that is the kind of large-scale event that is becoming more common. And not only are we seeing sea level rise, but of course the increase in these extreme storms are also pushing people into motion.
Indeed. Aaron, as you talk to your colleagues on this issue, do you find there is general consensus for the thesis that we're discussing tonight?
Well, we know that there's going to be a tremendous amount of growth in the Toronto region over the next 20, 30 years. We know that there's going to be 3.9 million more people living in the Greater Toronto Area than there were just a couple of years ago. And so whether that's being driven by climate migration directly or by a variety of other factors, we know that the region will continue to grow. And what we think is very important, and what we're trying to do here at Waterfront Toronto, is make sure that new growth that's happening in the city meets a very high standard of climate resilience, and that those people who choose to move to this part of the country and to this part of the world are protected and are able to thrive in place during a future that is less stable. And so in our case, we're focused on making communities more resilient through the built environment. So making those new construction projects more resilient to flooding and heat threats, like we've heard on this call, and also ensuring that we have housing and equitable community amenities available to everyone who's going to be coming to this region. So there's consensus on the growth that will be happening in the region, and I think that a lot of that is going to be driven by climate change. And so what we can do in Toronto and across the Great Lakes region in general is make sure that we're ready for it and make sure that we have construction standards and projects in place to house all of those new residents.
Gotcha. Okay, Dave, amplify on that a bit if you would. This scenario that we're discussing here, if it in fact does come to pass over the ensuing decades, presumably opens the door to some significant economic opportunities for the Great Lakes region. Can you just give us a sense about, what we're talking about specifically in terms of those economic opportunities?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about some opportunities and some risks as well, because let's just deal with the risks because we're talking about climate impacts first. So the Canadian Climate Institute just released a report today on the costs of climate change in Canada. And we find, although Ontario is not susceptible to these major events like Fiona, a full range of climate impacts are causing a drag on the economy, productivity impacts in labor and manufacturing, for example, road and rail delay, infrastructure challenges with heat days and floods. And we find at a household level, those impacts today manifest into an income loss of about $2,000 per household. So about $700 per individual, 2.5, 3 individuals per household. So although we have lower climate risk in the region than other regions, it's not to say that climate change is not a drag on the economy today. So that's the first thing to sort of think about. And then there are opportunities to address those impacts through adaptation, proactive adaptation. And Beth can talk, I'm sure, a lot more about that. And then so on the opportunity side, a lot of this has to do with low carbon futures in Canada's manufacturing base. So when I think of Climate Haven, I also think of emission reductions, and there are two sources of big benefits there. So one source of benefit is reduced improved air quality from getting off fossil fuels. Almost $1 billion investment, federal and provincial investment in the Hamilton steel mills to clean them up. Major local air quality impacts, which reduce healthcare costs, increase worker productivity. And then finally, the manufacturing base. We're going to be selling a lot of tech, and we are selling a lot of tech, clean tech. So I think of Climate Haven as those sort of three spaces: climate impacts, clean economy, and then the benefits from reducing fossil fuel use.
Beth, do you want to amplify on that in terms of the economic opportunities?
Yeah, I would be happy to. I think that those three pieces I really strongly agree with. The thing I would add to it that's really critical for a place to fall into this climate haven category is that there's also the affordable housing. And so I know that Toronto has been leading in adaptation for a long time. And I think that there's really thoughtful work going into that balance of how do you welcome those anticipated 3.9 million more people while it remains a place for people who are here today. And so when we're thinking about about what carves out that climate haven definition. I really appreciated that, thinking about the impacts, thinking about the clean economy, and then really thinking about, is this a place for everyone to be? Because a climate haven cannot be called, well, in the work that we've been doing, we are not thinking about climate havens as places that are exclusively for the rich or for those who are making this choice simply through amenity migration, but also for people who are being pushed into motion because of dealing with disasters and may not have the economic wherewithal that others are currently having when they're choosing to move to more climate safe spaces.
Well, that's a great point. So decision makers who are potentially watching this, you would like them to know that whatever happens, it's got to be seen through a sort of an equity lens and not just a haven for the rich. Is that the idea?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a very real possibility that climate migration becomes deeper gentrification of our cities, and that we also see a continuous kind of sprawl, and where people are being forced to the edges of metro areas where they're not able to live, where they have to work. And we have to make sure that as we're thinking proactively, we're finding ways to avoid that. And so there's such a difference in the planning that's able to happen right now between the greater Toronto area and the U.S. Great Lakes region. The U.S. Great Lakes region continues to see a decline in population. So here, a discussion about growth is really kind of fighting what the demographic trends look like already. And so we have a much harder time kind of moving to investing in that kind of infrastructure, affordable housing, the sort of assets that we know our American cities are going to need. As we look to the GTA, I think we really see a model of where there is anticipated growth in the way in which growth can be done in a manner that is more sustainable and more equitable.
That's just some of what we covered this week. You can find more, including the full conversations, on our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda. And that's it for this Friday, September 30th, 2022. Monday, can home care be a viable option for the growing number of people dealing with dementia? We'll examine that. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thanks for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a terrific weekend, and Steve will see you on Monday.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.